You think weddings are about lovejoy and the most beautiful moments? No. For some people, it is the perfect chance to become the main character in someone else's story. In this video, you will see guests who did not just come to attend a wedding, they came to complain, make demands, and turn everything into their own personal issue. From asking for the venue to be changed to saying the wedding dress was too white to doing things that make you pause for a few seconds just to ask, wait, is this actually real? 31 stories? And somehow everything only gets crazier from there. Story 1. The guest who reviewed the bathroom. This person did not come to the wedding to celebrate. They came to inspect. Before the wedding, they sent a message asking if they could stop by the venue just to take a quick look. That sounded completely normal. But the moment they arrived, they did not care about the stage, the flowers, or anything else. They walked straight to the bathroom. They stood there, arms crossed, looking around like an inspector on duty. Flush, slight nod, dry hands, frown. Everything was extremely serious. Nobody understood what they were doing. Then they left, without saying anything else. The next day, the bride received a message. Not a congratulations, but a file. A 12-point checklist. The water pressure was not good enough. The lighting was not flattering. The mirror should be raised a few more centimeters. And the final line said, "If this can be adjusted before the wedding, my experience will be better." Not the guest's experience, just theirs. The wedding had not even happened yet, but the inspection was officially complete. Story 2. The wedding dress was too white. One guest showed up to the wedding with a very serious issue. Not the food, not the sound, but the bride's dress. The moment the bride walked out, everyone went quiet for a few seconds because she looked stunning. Except this person. They tilted their head, looked closely, then said very confidently, "This color is a bit too white." At first, everyone thought they were joking. But no, they kept analyzing it. They said the white was too bright, too attention-grabbing, and made everyone around look washed out. And everyone around apparently meant them. Then they offered a solution, a very serious one. Maybe the bride should go with a softer tone, something like ivory or champagne, something less attention-grabbing, so that the overall look feels more balanced for everyone, which basically means reduce the bride's spotlight so the guests can feel more comfortable. And in that moment, you realize something. This is no longer a wedding. This is a stage, and in their mind, the bride is just background lighting. Story 3. The DJ did not understand my vibe. One guest walked into the wedding with a very clear expectation. The music had to match their vibe, not the couple's vibe, not the party's vibe, just theirs. When the DJ started playing, people were dancing, the atmosphere was good. But this person just stood there, arms crossed, looking at the DJ like they were judging a performance. Then they shook their head. This guy does not understand my energy. They walked over to the DJ. At first it was light feedback, then it became requests, and then a full list. A personal playlist they had already prepared. Not just a few songs, but a full sequence that had to be played in order. Because their mood needed to build up gradually. The DJ tried to be flexible, but this person did not. They stood next to the booth monitoring every track. When their favorite part came on, they nodded. Like everything was finally on track, and everyone else, they were just trying to understand what was happening. And that is when you realize, this is no longer the wedding playlist. This is the soundtrack. For one person only. Story 4. The chairs did not match the outfit. One guest showed up to the wedding with a very clear priority. Their outfit had to be perfect. Not just good looking, but perfectly coordinated with everything around them. When they walked into the reception area, everything looked fine. Until they noticed the chairs. They stopped, looked down, looked back at their outfit, then let out a small sigh. These chairs clash with my dress. It sounded like a joke, but it was not. They actually refused to sit down. Everyone else started taking their seats, eating, talking, and they just stood there. The whole time, carefully shifting around to avoid ruining the aesthetic. Someone offered to switch seats. They refused. No, it's all the same. Because the problem was not the position. It was the chairs. And for the entire event, they stayed like that. Just to make sure of one thing. Their outfit stayed untouched. And that is when you realize this is no longer a wedding. This is a background for their outfit. Story 5. The air conditioning was not cold enough. One guest came to the wedding with a very specific standard. The temperature had to be perfect, not just cool, but exactly at the level they found comfortable. When they walked into the hall, everyone else felt fine, but not this person. They stopped, made a slight face, then said very confidently, 25 degrees is offensive. At first it was just a few complaints. It is too hot in here. The air feels wrong. Then the frequency increased. Every few minutes, they brought it up again, like the temperature was personally attacking them. Eventually they found a fan, a completely normal fan, but to them, it was salvation. They stood right in front of it, did not move, did not share. If anyone came closer, they looked at them like they were guarding territory. The whole event, they barely did anything else. They just stood there, enjoying their own private stream of air, while everyone else was laughing, eating, and talking. They were in a completely different climate. And that is when you realize, this is no longer a wedding, this is a microclimate, built just for them. Story 6, the menu did not fit their diet. One guest came to the wedding with a very strict diet. Not the I'm kind of watching what I eat type, but full commitment. When the food was served, everyone started eating happily. But not this person. They looked down at the table, examined each dish, then shook their head. I'm on keto, I can't eat this. At first people thought they would just pick something small, but no, they rejected everything. No rice, no sauce, nothing met the standard. Then they called a server over. Very calm, like this was completely normal. They explained their diet in detail, then made a request. Could the kitchen prepare a custom dish just for them? Low carb, no sugar, exactly to their specifications. Not to make do, but to do it right. Meanwhile, everyone else was enjoying the wedding meal, and they were waiting for a custom order. And that is when you realize, this is no longer a wedding menu. This is a personal order. Story 7, the timeline was too long. One guest came to the wedding with a very clear limit, their patience, not a few hours, but a few minutes. When the ceremony began, everyone was focused. The atmosphere was quiet, formal. The bride and groom started the ceremony. Everything was normal, until this person checked their watch. Once, then twice, then again. Only a few minutes had passed, but to them, it was already too long. They started sighing, soft but enough for people nearby to hear. How much longer is this going to take? No one answered. The ceremony continued, but they did not stop. Every few minutes, another glance at the watch, like they were waiting on a deadline. Not because they had somewhere to be, but because they could not wait any longer. While everyone else was feeling the moment, they were counting seconds. And that is when you realize, this is no longer a ceremony. This is a loading screen, and their patience just failed. Story 8. They did not like the wedding flowers. One guest came to the wedding with a very sensitive sense. Not sound, but smell. The moment they walked into the decorated area, everyone else was impressed. The flowers were beautifully arranged. The space felt elegant, but this person stopped, took a breath, then made a face. This smell is bothering me. At first they just stayed to the side, did not get close, did not take photos. Like the flower area was a danger zone. Someone thought maybe they just were not used to the scent, but no, they started analyzing it. Which flowers were the problem? Which scents were too strong? And then they made a suggestion. Very seriously, could the entire floral setup be replaced something lighter, less fragrance, better suited for them? Not after the event, but right then, while everyone else was enjoying the space, they were trying to redesign it. And that is when you realize, this is no longer wedding decoration. This is a concept that needs revision. For one person only. Story 9. The parking was too far. One guest came to the wedding with a very clear standard. Distance had to be minimal, not close, but right at the entrance. When they arrived, the parking area was about a 2-minute walk away. Everyone else got out, walked in completely normal, but this person stopped. They looked around, looked at the path ahead, then asked very sincerely, I have to walk. 2 minutes. No one thought that was a problem, but to them, it was. From the moment they stepped in, the complaints started. It is too hot. It is too far. This is not convenient. At first, just a few comments, then repetition. To anyone they met, they described that short walk like it was a traumatic experience, like they had just survived something major. Meanwhile, Everyone else did not even remember how far they walked. But to them, it was unforgettable. And that is when you realize this is no longer the path to a wedding. This is a survival journey. That lasted 2 minutes. Story 10. There was no strong Wi-Fi. One guest came to the wedding with a very clear priority. The internet connection had to be stable, not for work, but for posting stories. The moment they walked in, they did not look at the stage, did not look at the bride. They pulled out their phone, checked the signal. There was Wi-Fi, but not strong enough. They tried to post a story. Loading, then fail. My story won't post. At first, just mild frustration, then more testing, switching networks, moving to different spots, holding the phone higher, even walking around the venue. But the result stayed the same, unstable. Then they got annoyed because they did not just want to post a story. They wanted to live stream, to share this experience with people online, to show everyone they were here. But the connection said no. While everyone else was laughing, eating, and talking, they were fighting the signal. And that is when you realize this is no longer a wedding. This is a Wi-Fi test. And according to them, the event failed. Story 11. They asked to reschedule the wedding. One guest received the wedding invitation and responded very calmly, not with congratulations, not with an RSVP, but by checking their calendar. They looked at the date, paused for a few seconds, then replied, "I'm busy that day." At first, everyone thought it was just a polite decline. But no, the next message was the real problem. "Can you move it to next weekend?" As if this were a coffee date, not a wedding that had been planned for months. They even explained further. They had personal plans that week. Their schedule was pretty full. If the date changed, they would be able to attend. That sounds reasonable, if this were their life. But this was someone else's wedding. While the bride and groom were preparing everything, they were optimizing their personal calendar. And that is when you realize this is no longer an invitation. This is a scheduling adjustment request, because in their mind, their calendar mattered more than everything else. Story 12. They reviewed the wedding cake like MasterChef. One guest came to the wedding with a very special skill, food evaluation. Not the is it good or not kind, but full analysis mode. When the wedding cake was brought out, everyone was excited. The bride and groom cut the cake. The atmosphere was great, but this person focused on something else. They took a slice, looked at it closely, gently rotated it, took a sniff, then a small bite. A few seconds of silence. People thought they were enjoying it. But no, the texture is not there. They started speaking louder, analyzing softness, moisture, flavor balance, even comparing it to cakes they had before, like they were on a cooking show. Then they delivered the verdict, right in the middle of the reception. 6.5 out of 10. No one asked, but they still scored it. While everyone else was eating cake and laughing, they were reviewing. And that is when you realize this is no longer a wedding cake. This is an exam, and they are the judge. Story 13. They brought their own chair. One guest came to the wedding with a very specific requirement, comfort. Not the any chair is fine kind, but with a very specific type of chair. When they walked into the reception area, everything was already set. Chairs matched, decor was coordinated. Everyone started taking their seats, but not this person. They stood there, looked at the chairs, then shook their head. "My back only works with this kind of chair." At first, people thought they were joking, but no. A few minutes later, they came back, carrying a chair from home. Not something small or portable, but a full chair they were used to. They placed it down, right in the middle of the reception area, ignoring the layout, ignoring everything around them, just to sit in their own chair. While everything else had been carefully arranged, they brought their own solution. And that is when you realize this is no longer a wedding seating plan. This is a mobile comfort zone. And for them, comfort always wins over logic. Story 14. They gave a speech without being invited. One guest came to the wedding with a very clear goal, to speak. Not just a simple congratulations, but a full speech. As the reception went on, everything followed the plan. The MC introduced speakers. A few people were invited up. Short, emotional, everything felt right. But this person was not on the list, and that was the problem. They sat for a while, listened for a bit, then stood up, walked straight to the stage. No warning, no name called. They grabbed the mic. I have a few words to say. At first people thought it would be a quick message, but no. They started telling stories, not about the bride and groom, but about themselves, their memories, their experiences, their feelings. 5 minutes passed, then 10, then 15. People started looking at each other, but they kept going. Like this was their moment. And that is when you realize, this is no longer a wedding speech. This is a monologue, and the main character is them. Story 15. They did not like the lighting and wanted the lights changed. One guest came to the wedding with a very specific concern. Lighting, not for visibility, but for looking good on camera. When they walked into the venue, the warm lighting looked beautiful, and the atmosphere was great. People were taking photos and enjoying themselves, but this person stopped. They opened the front camera, looked at the screen, tilted their head, changed angles, then frowned. My camera is not catching the light well. At first they just adjusted their position, changed angles, looked for a brighter spot, held the phone higher, even moved around the room, but nothing worked. Then they started commenting. The lighting was too yellow, too dim, not flattering enough. They said it like they were reviewing a studio setup, and then they made a suggestion. Could the lights be changed brighter, whiter, so they could look better on camera? Not for everyone, just for them. While the whole space had already been carefully prepared, they wanted to change all of it. And that is when you realize, this is no longer wedding lighting. This is a lighting setup for selfies. Story 16. They wanted their personal playlist all night. One guest came to the wedding with a very specific feeling. The music had to be right, not just on beat, but exactly matching their mood. When the DJ started playing, the atmosphere was lively. People were dancing, laughing, having a great time, but not this person. They stood there, listening, then shook their head. This song needs to be replayed. At first the DJ thought it was a normal request, playing it again once, no problem. But after the second time, they were still not satisfied. It is not the right feeling yet. Then a third time, a fourth. Every time the song ended, they asked for it again, like they were chasing the perfect moment. People started noticing something was off, but they stayed completely serious. Eventually, the song played 17 times, not for everyone, but because one person was not done yet. While the party kept going, they were stuck in a loop. And that is when you realize, this is no longer a playlist. This is a replay button until they feel it is right. Story 17. They complained. There were too many kids. One guest came to the wedding with a very clear expectation. The space had to be quiet, organized, and not too loud. When they walked in, they looked around. Everything felt lively. Family, friends, kids running around, a warm, energetic atmosphere. But this person stopped. They watched a child laughing, then frowned. Why are there so many kids? At first it sounded like a simple question, but then it turned into comments. It is too noisy. It is out of control. This is not appropriate. They said it like this was a major issue. Then they offered a solution. Very seriously. Could children be limited or moved to a separate area so it would not affect the experience? Not for everyone, just for them. While the space was filled with family, with connection, with people who mattered, they were trying to remove a part of it. And that is when you realize, this is no longer a family wedding. Family is the part they did not want. Story 18. They did not like their seat and reorganized the seating chart. One guest came to the wedding with a very clear standard. Their seat had to be right, not just comfortable, but the right people, the right vibe. When they found their table, everything was already arranged. Names clearly placed, a full seating chart. Everyone started taking their seats, but not this person. They stopped, looked at the name card, then shook their head. I'm not sitting here. At first people thought they would ask to switch, but no, they decided on their own. They walked to another table, pulled a chair, changed seats, even moved other people's spots, like they were rearranging a game. No asking, no permission, just adjusting things to make it fit better. People around them started getting confused, but they acted completely normal. Like this made perfect sense, and that is when you realize, this is no longer a seating chart. This is a suggestion. And for them, the seating chart is optional. Story 19. They did not like the photographer. One guest came to the wedding with a very clear standard. The photos had to look good. Not just decent, but perfect. When the photographer started taking pictures, everyone was posing, smiling, keeping it natural. The atmosphere was relaxed, everything was moving smoothly. But not this person. They looked into the camera, posed, then stopped. This angle makes me look bad. At first, the photographer thought a small adjustment would fix it. Take it again, no problem. But after the second round, they still were not satisfied. It is still not right. Then a third time, a fourth. After every shot, they wanted to review it immediately. Zoom in, adjust the lighting, judge every detail like they were approving an ad campaign. And then, ask for another retake. Not just a few times, but 10 times. While everyone else was waiting for their turn, they were still not finished. Like the entire event could just pause for them. And that is when you realize, this is no longer a wedding album. This is a personal photo shoot, and the photographer is apparently working for them. Story 20. They kept comparing it to other weddings. One guest came to the wedding with a very familiar habit, comparing, not just in their head, but out loud. As the event went on, everything felt great. Beautiful decorations, good food, a fun atmosphere. But this person was not enjoying it. They were observing, then started comparing. That other wedding did it better. At first, just a small comment, but then details. The flowers at another wedding were nicer. The music there was better. The food there had more variety. They went through each point, clearly, with specific examples, like they were writing a full review. And not just to one person, they told multiple people, anyone standing nearby, like they were sharing something helpful, while everyone else was enjoying the celebration. They were scoring it, comparing every category, like this was a competition. And that is when you realize, this is no longer a wedding. This is a live review, a Yelp review, happening in real time. Story 21. They brought their own air conditioner. One guest came to the wedding with a very clear limit. The temperature had to be right. Not just okay, but exactly what they could tolerate. When they walked into the venue, everyone felt comfortable. Cool air, stable. But this person stopped, looked around, then shook their head. I can't handle this temperature. At first it was just light complaining, but they did not stop there. A few minutes later, they came back, carrying a mini AC unit with a power cord, not to show off, but to actually use it. They found an outlet, plugged it in, placed it right next to where they were standing. Cold air started blowing. They stood right in front of it, like they had just created their own personal climate zone. While everything around them stayed the same, they had built their own environment. No asking, no explanation. Just comfort. And that is when you realize, this is no longer a wedding. This is a portable comfort zone. Story 22. They live-streamed the wedding and then complained about the lag. One guest came to the wedding with a very clear goal, not to attend, but to broadcast. The moment they walked in, they did not sit down, did not talk to anyone. They pulled out their phone, started a live stream, filmed the entire venue. Like this was an event that needed live coverage. At first, everything seemed fine. They talked to their online viewers, introduced every detail, like a professional host. But then, the problem showed up. The video started lagging. The audio became unstable. They stopped, looked at the screen, then frowned. The people watching online can't see clearly. At first, they just tried adjusting the network, changed position, held the phone higher, but nothing improved. Then they started getting visibly annoyed, clearly frustrated. Like this was some major failure of the event itself. While everyone around them was still enjoying the wedding, they were dealing with a technical issue. And that is when you realize, this is no longer a wedding. This is a live stream. And according to them, the content is having problems. Story 23. They wanted to replace the MC mid-event. One guest came to the wedding with a very specific standard. Stage energy, not just acceptable, but fully engaging. When the MC started hosting, everything was smooth. Introductions, transitions. The atmosphere was solid. People were following along. But not this person. They sat there, watching, then shook their head. This MC doesn't have enough energy. At first, just a small comment, but they did not keep it to themselves. They told the person next to them, then a few more, like they were analyzing a reality show. Then they made a suggestion. Very seriously, can we replace the MC right now with someone else? More energy, better suited to the vibe they wanted. While the program was still going on, they were trying to recast it. Not after the event, but live on stage. And that is when you realize this is no longer a wedding. This is a casting session happening in real time. Story 24. They were not the center of attention, so they created their own spotlight. One guest came to the wedding with a very clear goal: to be noticed, not just a little, but a lot. When the reception started, all eyes were on the bride, as they should be. It was her day. But this person was not happy. They stood there, watching, then realized something. No one was paying attention to them. No one is looking at me. At first, just a thought. But they did not stop there. They decided to change the situation. Not with something subtle, but with the entire outfit. A sparkling look. Brighter. More eye-catching. Even more attention-grabbing than the bride. They stepped out, moved slowly, like they were walking a runway. The lights reflected off them. People started looking, not because they wanted to, but because they could not look. And that is when you realize this is no longer the bride's spotlight. This is a spotlight taken over. And for them, attention is not given. It is taken. Story 25. They brought their own food and then criticized the wedding meal. One guest came to the wedding with a very prepared plan. Not a gift, but food. When everyone sat down, the meal started being served. The atmosphere felt relaxed. People were excited. But not this person. They opened their bag, pulled out their own food container, already prepared in advance. I brought my own. At first, people thought it was just a personal preference. No problem. But then, things started getting weird. They ate their own food, while looking over at the dishes on the table, then started commenting. This one is kind of bland. That one does not look very appealing. They said it so casually, like they were reviewing a restaurant. No one asked, but they still gave opinions. While everyone else was enjoying the meal, they were comparing, eating their own food, while criticizing everyone else's. And that is when you realize this is no longer a wedding dinner. This is a very strange combination. Eat separately. Judge publicly. A perfect double disrespect. Story 26. They wanted a private photo shoot on the stage. One guest came to the wedding with a very specific need. The photos had to look good. Not just group shots, but solo shots. When the stage opened for photos, people lined up and took turns. Everything was orderly. Everyone waited their turn. But not this person. They stood there, watching. Then decided not to wait. I need my own photos. At first they moved forward quickly, slipped past a few people, then a few more, until they were right in front of the stage, but they did not stop there. They stepped up, while someone else was still taking photos, even gently nudged them aside, not aggressive, but clear enough to take the center spot. They stood there, posing, adjusting angles, like this moment belonged to them, while everyone else below was still waiting. And that is when you realize this is no longer a wedding stage. This is a space temporarily rented by one person. Story 27. They complained. There was no VIP gift for them. One guest came to the wedding with a very specific expectation. The gift had to match their status, not just the same as everyone else, but better. When the event ended, wedding favors were handed out. People received them, smiled, said thank you. Everything felt light and positive. But not this person. They looked at the gift, held it up, examined it closely, then shook their head. I deserve more than this. At first people thought they were joking, but no, they started comparing. What others received, what they received, the value, the details, like they were reviewing a ranking system. Then they reached a conclusion. They should have had a separate gift, a VIP version. Different, more appropriate for their role. No one knew what that role was, but to them, it clearly existed. While everyone else was happily heading out, they were still calculating. And that is when you realize this is no longer a wedding favor. This is a tier system. And apparently, a guest ranking list is real. Story 28. They wanted to edit the wedding vows. One guest came to the wedding with a very specific standard. The content had to be concise, clear, and not too long. When the bride and groom began reading their vows, the room grew quiet. Everyone listened. Some were emotional. It was a meaningful moment, but not for this person. They sat there, listened for a bit, then checked their watch. This part is too long. At first it sounded like a small comment, but they did not stop there. They began analyzing. This section could be shortened. That part felt repetitive. The content could be edited to be more concise, as if this were a draft, not a final version. Then they made a suggestion. Very seriously, could this be rewritten shorter, more direct, more suitable for them to listen to? Not after the ceremony, but right in that moment. While everyone else was feeling the moment, they were editing it. And that is when you realize this is no longer a set of vows. This is a script, and they are the editor. Story 29. They wanted to change the wedding concept on the spot. One guest came to the wedding with a very refined eye, not to enjoy, but to evaluate. When they walked into the venue, everything had already been carefully prepared. The colors matched. The decorations were cohesive. The theme was clear. Everyone felt it worked. But not this person. They looked around, examined every detail, then shook their head. This theme doesn't work. At first it sounded like a simple opinion, but they did not stop there. They started analyzing. This color was off. That concept was not strong enough. The style was not quite there, as if this were a design draft, waiting to be revised. Then they made a suggestion. A different concept. Different colors. A completely different setup. Not for next time, but right now. While the event was already happening, they wanted to change everything. And that is when you realize, this is no longer a wedding. This is a project, being rebranded, in the middle of the event. Story 30. They publicly reviewed the entire wedding. One guest came to the wedding with a very clear goal, to review, not in their head, but matter out loud. While the event was happening, everyone else was enjoying themselves, eating, talking, laughing. But not this person. They observed, took mental notes, then started speaking. I'm going to give an honest review. At first people thought it was a joke, but it wasn't. They began scoring everything. Food 7 out of 10, music 6.5, decor decent but not outstanding. They went through each category, clearly, with commentary, like it was an official evaluation, and not just to one person, but to anyone standing nearby, as if they were sharing important insights. While everyone else was enjoying the celebration, they were compiling scores, like this was a product needing feedback. And that is when you realize, this is no longer a wedding. This is a review page. The wedding has become a Google review. Story 31. Final. I could have done it better. One guest stayed until the very end, with a very clear thought. They had observed everything, from start to finish, not missing a single detail. As the night came to an end, people began leaving. The atmosphere softened. The bride and groom were tired, but happy. But not this person. They walked over, calm, confident. Honestly, I think I could have done it better. Not a joke, not softened, a serious statement. They began summarizing. This part could be better. That part was not optimal. The timeline could be tighter. The space could look nicer. Everything could be improved. And if it were them, they would create a perfect wedding. More polished, more refined, exactly the way they envisioned it. While the bride and groom had just finished the most important day of their lives, they were presenting a better version. And that is when you realize, this is no longer your wedding. This is a draft, according to their standards. 31 stories, and every single one of them real enough to make you pause for a few seconds. Just to process. The funny part is not that they complain, but that they truly believe they are right. Comment the story that shocked you the most, or the one that made you think, wait, is this actually real? Like if this video made you realize your wedding is actually pretty normal. Share this with that one person who always says I am very easygoing. And do not forget to subscribe, because out there are still many more stories, and trust me, they only get crazier from here.